The glittering candlelight reflected in his wine glass as he leaned in close, his breath warm against my cheek. My heart fluttered, expecting a proposal, or at least the whispered promise of one. My birthday had always been a quiet affair, but this year, he'd gone all out. Candlelit dinner at the most exclusive rooftop restaurant in the city, champagne on ice, and the view of the skyline sparkling like my dreams. But instead of reaching for the small velvet box I imagined, he placed a crisp envelope in front of me. "Open it," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Inside was a single typed sentence: "I'm upgrading to someone better." I laughed, assuming it was some twisted joke. Then he smiled, not kindly, but with the satisfaction of a man who had rehearsed this. "I've taken the condo, the car, the joint account. Everything. Your practice." The city lights spun as if mocking me. The tablecloth bunched in my fists. My birthday cake, untouched, sat like a cruel reminder that everything I thought we shared was a lie. As he stood and walked away, the hostess brought out a dessert plate with "Happy Birthday" written in chocolate. I sat alone while strangers watched, pretending not to pity me. But I would not cry. Not tonight. Because this story wasn't ending here. It was only beginning. And when it ended, he wouldn't be smiling. My name is Marissa Cole, and I was 29 years old when I learned the man I loved saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. His name was Darren Whitlock. For 3 years, he had shared my home, my heart, and my future, or so I thought. On my birthday, he dumped me with a smirk and a cruel note, telling me he was upgrading to someone better. He emptied our shared bank account, transferred the lease of my own condo to his name, and drove away in the car I paid for. I had trusted him with everything, and he left me with nothing but crumbs of cake and a room full of strangers watching my humiliation. But that night, as I stared out over the city I once dreamed of conquering with him, I knew something deep inside me had shifted. He thought I was broken, but I wasn't. I was just getting started. I was never one to believe in fairy tales, but I had always believed in effort. While other girls dreamt of being swept off their feet, I built a life from the ground up. I worked 2 jobs through college, graduated without debt, and by 26, I had saved enough to put a down payment on a 1-bedroom condo just outside the city center. It was modest, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every coat of paint, it all told a story of late nights and quiet triumphs. By the time I met Darren, I had just received a promotion to marketing coordinator at a tech firm downtown. It wasn't flashy, but it was a step up, and it came with benefits, stability, and a sense that I was finally finding my footing. I met him at a networking event my boss forced me to attend. He was charming in that easy, expensive kind of way, like someone who never had to worry about rent or reheated leftovers. He wore confidence like cologne, and when he spoke to me, it felt like I was the only woman in the room. He told me he was a consultant, though I never quite understood what he did. Something about business development strategy. I chalked up the vagueness to his brilliance. Some people are just too advanced for the rest of us to understand. I know now that was the first red flag, but I didn't see it then. I saw a man who asked about my dreams and seemed to listen. I saw someone who said all the right things. Darren moved in 6 months later. It started as something temporary, a water leak in his apartment, he claimed, but somehow his overnight bag became a drawer, and the drawer became a closet. Before I knew it, we were splitting groceries and hosting wine nights with friends like we were a real couple with real permanence. I paid most of the bills. He said consulting was feast or famine. He assured me he was on the verge of something big. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And when he cooked dinner or ran a bath for me after a long day, it felt like it was all worth it. He made me feel seen. My friends were cautious. "Doesn't he ever work?" they'd whisper after he missed another double date. "Do you really know what he does all day?" I'd defend him fiercely, claiming he worked from home, had clients overseas, operated on a different schedule. I didn't want to admit the little things I had noticed too. The calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The way he'd scroll through his phone with a smirk and tilt it just out of my line of sight. Still, I pushed those thoughts down. Darren made me laugh. He danced with me in the kitchen. He remembered how I liked my coffee. I wanted a future, and he seemed to want it too. Around my 29th birthday, he started acting strange, more attentive, almost overly so. He cooked my favorite meals 3 nights in a row. He brought flowers home, something he hadn't done in months. He even insisted we book a reservation at the rooftop restaurant I'd once mentioned in passing. I told myself this was it. This was the proposal. The next chapter. I couldn't have been more wrong. The night of my birthday shimmered with the kind of perfection that makes you suspicious if you've lived long enough. The restaurant was perched high above the city, with string lights tangled across beams like constellations drawn by hand. A pianist played somewhere in the background, soft and elegant, as if the entire evening had been curated to cradle a single moment of happiness. Darren was dressed in a charcoal suit he had never worn before. I assumed it was new, a birthday gesture, maybe part of the surprise he had been hinting at all week. He kissed my cheek lightly as we were seated and ordered a bottle of champagne before I had time to speak. I tried to quiet the fluttering in my chest, imagining him dropping to one knee between the entrees and the cake. He was smiling, but it wasn't the smile I knew. There was something tight and calculating behind it. I ignored the warning in my gut. When the envelope came, I thought it was a card. I imagined something sentimental, maybe even a flight confirmation for a weekend getaway. I was halfway through opening it when I noticed the hostess bringing a small cake to the table, candles flickering. But I didn't blow them out, because inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. One line: "I'm upgrading to someone better." I blinked at the words, too absurd to be real. I looked up, expecting laughter. A prank. A poorly timed joke. Instead, Darren leaned back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. "It's not personal," he said casually. "You're great, Marissa. You've been comfortable. But I'm done playing small." My throat closed. What is this? I met someone else. She's connected. Her father owns one of the firms I want to work with. She's already helped me set up a real consultancy. This, he said, gesturing vaguely at me at the city, was just the warm-up. My voice came out in a whisper. "You live with me." "Lived," he corrected. "I moved out this morning. Had the movers come while you were at work?" I gripped the table. "The condo is in my name." "No, it isn't. You transferred the title to both of us last year when you refinanced. Remember?" I handled the paperwork. My hands went cold. "And the car?" I asked. "Technically in my name. I helped register it." He had anticipated every step, every loophole. Every moment I trusted him, he had taken notes. Turned it into a strategy. "You emptied the account," I whispered. "I saw the alert this morning. I needed capital to get started. And let's be honest, it was mostly my money by now." That was a lie, but I was too stunned to argue. He stood. "Don't make this harder than it is. You're strong. You'll bounce back." Then he walked out. Just like that. The hostess approached, smiling apologetically, holding the birthday cake I had once dreamed of sharing with the man I thought loved me. Her smile faltered when she saw my face. "I'm sorry," she said. "Should I?" I nodded. "Take it away." I sat there alone, surrounded by strangers, pretending not to stare. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me snapped. He thought I was soft. He thought I was finished. He had no idea who he had just betrayed. The first morning after Darren left, I woke up on the couch in a friend's apartment, my neck stiff and my mind foggy with disbelief. It felt like a movie I hadn't agreed to star in, one where your whole life gets erased with a single envelope and a smirk. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I just sat there, replaying his words over and over, searching for cracks I might have missed. The way he'd praised me, how easily he'd leaned into my life like it was his to borrow. I felt humiliated. But humiliation has a short half-life when you're someone like me. What it leaves behind is sharper rage and clarity. The condo, the car, the bank account, all tied up legally, and thanks to the paperwork I had once signed without reading, all in his favor. I had nothing, or so he thought. I started making calls. First to my bank. They confirmed the withdrawal, every last dollar drained, right before midnight. No fraud alert, since his name had been added as a secondary account holder months ago. My heart twisted at the memory of handing him the papers, trusting him to help manage the bills. Next, I called my old real estate attorney. He winced when he heard my name. "You signed over joint ownership to him," he said. "Unusual, considering you weren't married." I hung up. The walls felt like they were closing in, until one sentence surfaced in my mind. "He thinks I'm finished." I wasn't. I went back to work the next day. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wore lipstick. I smiled through meetings. And on my lunch break, I opened a blank spreadsheet. His new girlfriend's name, if he hadn't lied, was Elise Grant. I had overheard it once, slipped into conversation as a client. I looked her up. Her father was indeed on the board of a mid-tier consulting firm known for quietly acquiring smaller startups. Darren's new business was listed on a vague website he had clearly thrown together in a rush. Generic buzzwords, a stock photo of a handshake, and one employee, him. I smiled. Because I still had something Darren had underestimated, my brain. And he had left enough breadcrumbs for me to follow. I began tracking Darren's movements like a hunter watching its prey. He posted frequent updates on social media, tagging Elise in expensive restaurants, boutique hotel stays, and client onboarding events that all looked suspiciously like soft networking parties with free drinks. I noticed something strange. Most of the events he posted from were hosted at the same 3 venues, all under the same parent company. A company that had, a few months prior, posted a request for marketing consultation services. A request I had responded to through my employer and lost out on. Suddenly it clicked. Darren had used my login. Back then, I had worked late one night from home and left my work laptop open. He must have seen the request, written his own proposal using the knowledge I had shared with him, and pitched his services through a shell consultancy. He had stolen my proposal and won the contract. My fingers trembled with fury. I went back into my emails. Searched for keywords, old memos, calendar entries. I found what I needed. Drafts of strategy plans I had developed, complete with timelines and branding themes that now appeared, slightly altered, on Darren's website and materials. He had copied my work. He hadn't just taken my money or my home. He had taken my ideas. But in doing so, he'd left behind a trail of digital fingerprints, timestamps, documents, and witnesses. All I needed now was someone who would listen. So I reached out to the company that had hired him, pretending to be a curious consultant looking to collaborate. They responded quickly. Eagerly, in fact. They were dissatisfied with his progress. He'd missed 2 deadlines. His deliverables were thin. Their tone was urgent. I offered to send a sample of my own work. They agreed. And with that, I knew exactly how to move. The following weeks were a slow, deliberate burn. First, I made sure my own employer was aware of what Darren had done. I quietly compiled evidence of the stolen proposal, showing how he had accessed the files during a date that coincided with his time in my apartment. I didn't accuse him outright. I simply presented facts, timelines, and side-by-side comparisons. My boss, a woman with a sharp eye and a long memory, nodded slowly. "Let me handle this," she said. Within days, word spread across our network of partners. Darren's name was quietly removed from 2 speaking events and 1 press release. But I wasn't done. I approached the firm that had originally hired him, Elise's father's company, and sent a complete project outline that corrected all of Darren's mistakes. I did not mention our history. I signed the documents under my own name, no affiliation. They responded within 48 hours, offering a phone call. Elise's father joined that call. His voice was clipped. Professional. Curious. I've reviewed your work, he said. It's clean. Smart. Precise. May I ask where you've consulted before? I gave him a short version of my resume. He made no mention of Darren. But I could hear it, the doubt. The comparison. The growing suspicion. A week later, Darren's site vanished. His email auto-replied with an out-of-office message. Elise stopped appearing in his photos. And a contact at one of the venues he used for events told me, quietly, that their payments had bounced. He was unraveling. And I hadn't even begun. Darren had always believed he was untouchable because he wrapped his manipulation in charm. But charm fades when the invoices pile up and deadlines are missed. The illusion he built was cracking, and I was the one handing out the hammers. I waited until everything was perfectly positioned before making my final move. There was one last thing I needed to do, not just for the satisfaction, but to ensure he couldn't recover. Through the marketing firm where I still worked, I arranged to co-host a panel at an upcoming consultancy summit. It was a modest event, but well attended by people Darren desperately wanted to impress. I submitted my name as a solo speaker, focusing on intellectual property and ethics in digital branding, two areas Darren had carelessly danced through with borrowed words. I knew Darren had planned to attend. His name had appeared in the preliminary guest list under Guest of Elise Grant. What he didn't know was that Elise would not be accompanying him. Her father had quietly removed Darren from their firm's project list, citing performance concerns. And according to a reliable contact, Elise had been told the truth, not just about the missed deadlines, but about how Darren had gotten the contract in the first place. By the time he stepped into that ballroom, everything he thought he controlled was already gone. I walked onto the stage in a sleek navy dress, calm and measured, the lights warming my face as I scanned the room and met his gaze. His expression shifted from smug to pale in the span of 5 seconds. I introduced myself. Tonight's presentation is about trust, I began. Not just between brands and consumers, but between partners, collaborators, and colleagues. What happens when someone uses access, not talent, to rise? The room leaned in. I projected screenshots of stolen proposals. Document metadata showing timestamps, authorship, and editing histories. Nothing personal. Just facts. Clean, verifiable, devastating facts. I never once said his name. I didn't have to. By the time I finished, the silence was heavy with discomfort, directed entirely at the man seated in the back corner, who now looked like he was sinking into his chair. When the event ended, people approached me, some offering handshakes, others whispering that they suspected as much about him. One woman from Elisa's firm handed me her card and said, "You're exactly what we were looking for." Darren slithered out quietly. But I wasn't done. 2 days later, a formal complaint was submitted to the Ethics Board of the Consulting Association. Signed by multiple firms who had worked with Darren and realized they had received recycled versions of each other's proposals. I made sure the evidence I had compiled was forwarded discreetly to all of them. That same week, I filed a civil suit for intellectual property theft. My attorney confirmed that while I might not recoup everything he stole, the damages for using my original strategy documents without credit or consent were significant enough to bury his already flailing business. But my favorite moment? Seeing my car, towed away from his condo when he defaulted on the payments. Turns out, while he changed the name on the title, he forgot to update the insurance. And the condo? He couldn't make the new mortgage without Elise's money. It went into foreclosure. Everything he built off my back had collapsed. And I never raised my voice. Never made a scene. I just gave him the gift of consequences. It's been a year since that birthday. A year since I sat at that rooftop table, staring at a slice of cake I never touched, believing I had been discarded like an afterthought. But time, when used with purpose, has a way of turning ruin into something sharper. Something more useful. Darren never reached out. I imagine his pride prevented it, even when everything around him began to fall. Or maybe he simply couldn't face me. I wasn't the naive woman who once handed him keys to her home, her accounts, her trust. I was the woman who stood in a ballroom full of executives and burned down every lie he built without ever raising her voice. I heard whispers after the lawsuit settled. Quiet murmurs that Darren had left the city, that he was trying to start over somewhere else under a new brand name. But his reputation had already preceded him. The firms he wanted to impress now knew who he was, not because I told them, but because his failures had begun to speak louder than I ever needed to. I didn't win back the condo or the car, but I gained something worth more: clarity, reputation, and control over the narrative he tried to rewrite without me. I bought a new apartment, not bigger, but better. I paid for it in full, in my name, with the salary increase I received after being promoted to Director of Strategy. My presentation at that summit had turned heads, and the firm offered me a leadership role I never even asked for. They said I had poise under pressure, a command of the room that only came from surviving something real. They were right. Survival changes you. I learned to trust my instincts again. The quiet little voice that once hesitated to question a partner's intentions now speaks with certainty. I no longer hand out chances like confetti. I ask questions. I look for the signs. But I haven't closed myself off. I'm just wiser. People love to frame betrayal as a heartbreak. But sometimes betrayal is just exposure. Darren didn't change. He revealed who he had always been. And I finally saw him clearly. In his absence, I began to fill the silence with things I had forgotten I loved. I started painting again, just watercolors, mostly for myself. I took weekend hikes alone, learning how to feel safe in my own company. I traveled to Lisbon for a solo trip I had once postponed for his birthday. I laughed more, cried less, breathed deeper. Not every day is easy. Some mornings I still wake up with echoes of that restaurant in my chest, the flicker of the candlelight, the weight of that envelope. But now I light my own candles. I sign my own cards. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming your time, your name, your story. Darren taught me how easily trust can be twisted. But he also taught me something else, something he never intended. That I am not replaceable, not disposable, not something to upgrade from. I was never the warm-up. I was the main event. And the next time someone hands me a future, it'll be one I built with eyes wide open and both hands on the pen. So, if someone ever tells you they've found someone better, let them go. Let them believe they've won. Then build something so radiant, so unshakably yours, that when they finally look back, they're blinded. And when that moment comes, ask yourself, was it ever really a loss? If what you gained was finally seeing your worth. Because I did. And I will never forget it again.